7:23, 23 after 7 o'clock. Beautiful morning out there, 41 degrees, although a little early if you are an actor, used to getting up probably 9, 10, 11 o'clock. Ian Ruskin joining us, who's getting ready for a big performance tonight at the University of Oregon. Ian, welcome into not just the wake-up call, but to Eugene.
Hi, thanks. It's good to be back here.
You flew in on probably your private jet.
Oh, yes. I came on the private jet, yes. I usually get up about 3 in the afternoon, actually. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
What do we need to know about you? I've been looking at your resume, where you came from, where you started out, and then, of course, came over here. Kind of talk about the highlights of the career.
Okay. My career's been interesting. I mean, I in England followed the kind of classic path of going to drama school, working in theatre, doing some television, some film, but primarily theatre. I guess one highlight was I was in the television production of King Lear with Olivier. It was Laurence Olivier's last great performance, really.
What was that like working with him?
He was amazing. I mean, he just he just wanted to do the work. And he had a cast, probably the greatest cast of English actors ever put together for television, I think. And he was, the only time he ever threw his weight around was he once insisted on running the play a second time that day. And, of course, the next day he was ill. So, But other than that, he just was an actor. Did
you take anything away from working with him in the technical bag of what you use today? And if the answer is no.
Well, I just go ahead and say no.
No.
I learned nothing from the man.
I remember the way he used his hands. That's something I do remember. He used them very specifically, almost as if he was painting with them. They were very expressive hands. I do remember that.
And prior to that, you were probably not using your hands at all.
I used to keep my hands in my pockets all the time. Yeah. Because that way,
Yeah.
So you come to America. How is
common acting mistake?
How was the introduction to Hollywood?
Well, Hollywood for a while went very well because I was a new English actor in town, and I started to play these bad guys on episodic television. Then, of course, two things happened. One is that every week more English actors were coming to Hollywood. So you
lost your niche.
Yeah, you become the old guy, not the new one. So that was one thing. So work got more difficult, and I have to say that I was finding the kind of work I was doing to be not really worth very much. I mean, it was like entertaining, but it didn't challenge in any way. It didn't give the audience a story to really think about the way a great play does.
You were doing what we would call is like production line work. It's just, go in.
Yes. I mean, it was Murder, She Wrote. It wasn't like bad shows, and there's nothing wrong with Murder, She Wrote. But after a while, that kind of show, for me anyway, as an actor, I got a little tired of it. And then I actually discovered a man called Harry Bridges, who was a labor leader, an Australian who came to California, and I wrote a play about him. And that became, my career completely changed. And I had the play, I produced radio and film documentaries, mainly about him or people around him, was doing less and less actual acting work in the industry. Then I discovered Thomas Paine. So then I have these two plays and these two men who are in my life, kind of.
And you're doing, To Begin the World Over Again, The Life of Thomas Paine. It's a free performance tonight. What first drew you into Thomas Paine and who he was and what he was about?
A couple of people kind of introduced me to him. I mean, not literally, but
although that would be a great story too. That would have been quite
interesting.
Yeah.
I started reading about him. I read a biography, and I got, as with Harry Bridges, but maybe even more so with Paine, I just got fascinated by this man who, in my opinion, is probably the most misunderstood man in American history, I think. And his impact, well, there are two things. His impact on the world was enormous. But also his life was an endless kind of roller coaster of great things happening and terrible things happening. He was nearly hung. He was nearly guillotined. I mean, these were, here was this man in France who was one of the heroes of the French Revolution until they decided they didn't like him, and he really was very nearly guillotined.
Yeah,
So
and they elected him to the French Convention. The guy
Yes.
didn't even speak French.
That's right. That's all in the play. Yes, that despite my lack of French.
Yeah.
So he's also someone that he arrived in Philadelphia when he was 37, and he really had done very little of any importance in his life. He'd become a very good debater. He'd written one kind of petition on behalf of tax inspectors, because for a while he was a tax inspector. But that's all he'd really done. And he arrived in Philadelphia, and he changed the world. I mean, he wrote Common Sense, which was the spark of the revolution. He wrote all those American crises, these are the times that try men's souls, that kept the troops fighting for Washington.
And then later he writes Common Sense, which almost undoes him again.
Age of Reason.
Pardon me, The Age of Reason,
yes.
which, I mean, when he died, I think there was only like 3 or 4 people that
No,
even
there was a
showed up.
large crowd. It was 6.
Was there? Oh,
Yeah, it was 6.
Right, the
on, get your
thronging
facts
horde
right.
of 6. Okay,
6 people
But-
went to his funeral.
Yeah, because it was considered to be anti-Christian.
Right. And the irony is that, well, he was a deist, and deists believe in a God, a father, a supreme force. They do not believe in organized religion.
Right.
And that's what he was, as were almost all the founding fathers. I mean, almost all of them. But when he wrote Age of Reason in parts 1 and 2, it was seen just as an attack on Christianity, which it was. It was. I mean,
Right.
it was an attack on all churches, but it was not an attack on the idea of God. And he said that he wrote it, or wrote the two of them, to actually, as an attack on atheism. He totally believed in God. He just said, if you want to see God, go and take a walk in the woods. And there God is. So that was his belief. But it was that those two works were greatly used against him, and turned many, many people against him. He lost many of his friends. He still had admirers. It wasn't,
Right.
but it was, I don't know what the split would be, but the Federalists at the time really hated him.
When you sit down to write this, what aspect? I mean, there's so many things you could cover. What direction did you set out with the intent to cover in the man?
Well, I decided from the beginning to be stepping out of the shadows. So I've come to today as Paine, out of the mists of time, if you like, to talk about
Things of today.
No, not today. To talk about my life. So I basically tell the story of my life and read from various works and things. But it's and
Do you acknowledge things of the present?
no, for a while when I was writing, I did, and I would make references to things of this time, and it seemed clumsy. It didn't feel right. I mean, I wrote it so that I hope people draw certain conclusions, if you like, and see there are so many issues in Paine's life that are still with us today. And I want people to but I decided I wanted people to make those connections themselves rather than me say something
Right.
as Paine. Although I do at the end say that that I hope that people will spend their lives making the world a better place, which is what I tried to do as Paine.
As somebody who likes biographies, in particular historical biographies, the type that I like are able to not just be a compendium of events of a particular person's life, but actually allow you to kind of get into that person's skin and get an idea of that person's actual personality. and their quirks and what made them who they were. How hard was it for you to track down the kind of information that allowed you to kind of crawl into his skin and be him?
Well, that's certainly what I very much wanted to do, because I'm an actor. I'm not a historical figure, you know.
Right.
So I read a lot of biographies, and I also had 5 scholars who signed on to keep an eye on me and check that things were accurate. But there are, with Paine, there are a few people who wrote about him as being bipolar, or that he would disappear and be in depression for weeks. And all the scholars said that is not true. He was actually an optimistic man.
Interesting that you confuse being optimistic with
bipolar.
Yeah,
I frequently confuse the two.
Yeah.
Wow.
Psychologists even have a hard time differentiating.
I was just always looking for clues. There was one passage in one of the biographies talked about the fact he liked to sing. So I sing 4 very short little songs in the play that kind of are different times in his life. The whole question of his optimism. His first, I guess I can talk about this on air. His first wife and unborn child both died in childbirth, which was not that unusual,
right?
But really shook him up. This was the first and only love of his life. And although he did marry a second time, there's no evidence that he ever had sex again, ever, for the rest of his life. It appears that the shock of that loss just turned him off that whole area of living. And they think that the second marriage was just a marriage of great affection, where they looked after each other. So
they're best friends, perhaps.
Yes, yeah. So a thing like that, because it's hard. When you write a story, you always want to have some sex in it.
Of course.
So that was
that
was difficult. But there were times in his life where a woman would approach him. So I put a little bit of that in. He also, he said, I found this wonderful letter he wrote to someone getting married, and saying that there's no greater supporter of marriage than I am, but that I have been left, the tide has passed me by as all my thoughts were on the wing for my dear America. That he put all that energy, that kind of feeling, that love, that into this idea of America, and then of revolution, of change. He also loved his horse. He had a horse called Button, and he loved the horse.
Perfect timing. Ian Ruskin in studio to begin The World Over Again, The Life of Thomas Paine, tonight, 7:30 at Room 110 in the Knight Law Center. It is free, and if you could, we'd love to hear a portion of it. In fact, we'll even have a little intro music.
Oh,
wait for the
very
cue.
Nice.
Cue's coming up.
I'm overwhelmed. I shall read to you from Age of Reason, Part 2. And I want to thank the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics, because they made this happen. So for both tonight, and I'm performing tomorrow in Salem, both those. So, when it shall be said in any country in the world, my poor are happy, neither ignorance nor distress is to be found among them. My jails are empty of prisoners, my streets of beggars. The aged are not in want, the taxes are not repressive. The rational world is my friend, because I am a friend of happiness. When these things can be said, then may that country boast of its constitution and its government. Would you like a little more? We have time, or
Sure, little bit.
The elderly, the widowed, newly married couples, the poor, the unemployed, disbanded soldiers, and children who would be required to attend school must be provided for from state funds, And all this support is not the nature of charity, but of a right. It will be paid for through general taxation. We are all children of God, and the greatest offense of all to the great Father is when we seek to torment and render each other miserable. My country is the world, and my religion is to do good.
Very nice. Tonight, 7:30 in Eugene. Where will you be in Salem?
Salem, I will be at Willamette University in the Cone Chapel, which is going to be very interesting because for Paine to be speaking in a chapel will be fascinating.
Are you going to add a little improv to that aspect?
You never know. You never know. I do have these lines about stained glass windows and things. But the point, I really hope Paine can be a very dividing figure politically, because he's been a hero to all political spectrums. Now
we need a little division in this day and age.
Yeah, because we don't really have any.
No.
I think it's these politicians. They're so happy and sweet to each other all the time.
All the time.
But anyway, so I'm hoping. I mean, I really believe that in this play is what Paine. Well, a lot of it's his own words. So I just think my hope is that people will come and they will reconsider their understanding of Paine. Now, they can then say they like him or don't like him. But I find it frustrating if people say they like someone when they're totally misguided on what that person believed in. So that's what this is about.
We'll continue the knowledge gathering tonight. Again, Room 110, Night Law Center. It is a free performance of To Begin the World Over Again, The Life of Thomas Paine. The writer, the director, the star of it, Ian Ruskin. Thank you so much for coming in.
It's been a real pleasure.
Very much appreciated. It's 7:40, 11:20 KPNW.